Hey there, everyone, and welcome to Pour and Explore, a wine, food, and travel podcast. I'm your host, Nick Elliott, the wine guy. I'd love to be your go-to guide for all things wine, food, and the amazing places they take us. Here on Pour and Explore, we'll sip, savor, and wander through the exciting world of wine, discuss incredible cuisines, and uncover the stories behind unforgettable destinations. Each week, I'll bring you lively conversations with wine experts, chefs, travel pros, and fellow enthusiasts. We'll share practical tips, hilarious tales, and plenty of inspiration to fuel your next adventure. So grab a glass, pull up a chair, and join me as we pour, explore, and celebrate the good life. Let's dive in. All right, friends, welcome back to Pour and Explore, the podcast where we sip, snack, and travel our way through the delicious corners of the world. I'm your host, Nick Elliott. Today, we are going to be diving into something that I geek out about all the time. Of course, it is fermentation. We're going to keep this episode a little bit shorter. I don't want to turn this into a chemistry class by any means, although there will be a little bit of science in here. Fermentation is the behind the scenes magic that gives us wine, bread, cheese, beer, kombucha, miso, yogurt, and so much more. It's ancient, it's global, and fermentation is absolutely fascinating. I loved learning about the fermentation process. And I would love to tell you a little bit more about it because, hey, I love to know where my food comes from. I know you love to know where your food comes from. And we can't talk about a lot of foods, as I just listed a second ago, without talking about the process of fermentation. So whether you're sipping a glass of Chardonnay, crunching into some kimchi, or slicing into some stinky blue cheese, today we're going to talk all about how it connects. So let's go. What is fermentation? Fermentation, in its simplest form, is a metabolic process. Fermentation happens when yeast or bacteria consume sugar and they convert it into something else. Oftentimes, in the case of wine and spirits, is alcohol. It will also turn that sugar into gas, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Or it can also turn the sugar into acid. And we're going to talk about a few different types of fermentation and the main types. Again, we're going to keep it very high level here today, people. Alcoholic fermentation. What does that mean? Alcoholic fermentation, what gives us beer, it gives us bourbon, it gives us bitters, it gives us wine, of course. It's where yeast, which is a small microscopic plant, yeast converts sugar into alcohol, and a secondary byproduct is carbon dioxide. That is it. Beer, wine, spirits all come from alcoholic fermentation. Now, what we do with that alcohol after the fermentation process and where the sugars are coming from. Is it coming from barley? Is it coming from grapes? Is it coming from strawberries? Where is the sugar coming from? That is going to be what creates the beverage that we're then going to drink. There is then lactic acid, LACTIC, lactic acid fermentation, and that is where a bacteria is used, a beneficial bacteria, is used to turn the sugars into lactic acid. So I want you to think about yogurt, of course. That's the big one. Kimchi, which is fermented vegetables, usually some type of cabbage. Sourdough bread. Everyone, every other video on my Instagram feed is someone making sourdough bread, and they have their mother or their starter and all of that stuff. That's what's happening in that jar right there is fermentation. They don't talk about that, but that is what is happening. And even some cheeses are made with the help of fermentation. Humans, by the way, started fermenting thousands of years ago, and it was mostly used as a way to preserve food. This was before refrigeration, and fermentation was how we kept things edible and safe. But over time, we fell in love with the flavors that fermentation created and the benefits that it created as well. For example, in the case of yogurt, we do it for the flavor. Of course, we do it for the tradition. We do it for culture because we've been doing it, for thousands of years, and we'll even do it for some health reasons as well. Kombucha, yogurts, etc., etc. That is the breakdown of the main types of fermentation. All right, I can't talk about fermentation. I can't do pour and explore without talking about wine because, of course. Wine starts with fruit, usually grapes, not always, but usually. And inside those juicy grapes is sugar. Lots and lots and lots of sugar. We don't taste it with the table grapes that they sell in the grocery store and, you get on a charcuterie board or a cheese board. Those grapes have not nearly the amount of sugar that a wine grape has. Wine grape is a different species of grape. And they've got a ton of sugar in them, which makes them the ideal candidate for making wine, with a moderate amount of alcohol in it. When we crush grapes, we expose the juice to yeast. And whether that yeast is added yeast, which happens in a lot of wineries, I would say most wineries, especially here in the US, or those yeasts can be wild yeast coming from the air around and they live on the outside of the grape and they come into the winery and start the fermentation process. Once the yeast goes to work, that's where all the magic happens. The yeast is going to eat the sugar and it spits out alcohol and CO2. The process of making wine is a fascinating one, and I was lucky enough to do it for many years. I'm not going to go into any stories or anything like that because you've heard enough of them. I just want to give you information today, people, and have fun doing it. But it really, really is a lot of fun, and it's a very, very sexy thing, if you want to say that. Humans, we can influence fermentation in a lot of ways. Alcoholic fermentation that I'm talking about in this specific segment. The choice of yeast, certainly matters. As I said, some winemakers will add commercial yeast to their wine. That gives you better control over the product. Again, commercial yeast that you get out of a bag that was created in a lab gives you better control of how the wine turns out. Wild yeast is great, and that's the way wine was made for thousands of years before technology came along. And wild yeast can tend to give you some funkier flavors, some funkier aromas, and can make the fermentation process a little more unpredictable unless you really know what you're doing. And of course, the winemakers have been doing it for years over in France, Italy, Spain, etc., etc. They know what they're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and let them do their thing. What type of vessel are we doing the fermentation in? That is also going to play a big part in how the wine is going to come out. Are we fermenting our wine in stainless steel to keep things a little more crisp and clean? Or are we fermenting our wine in an oak barrel or a cask, for example, which is going to add some additional flavors and some additional textures to the wine? And then finally, at what temperature are we fermenting our wine juice, our grape juice rather? And that cooler temperatures is the way that a lot of white wines are done. Cooler temperatures will help you preserve the freshness of the white wines, and warmer temperatures during fermentation can coax out more complex flavors. So it's very much an artistic choice of a winemaker to do cold fermentation versus warm fermentation, and so on. Just a little side note here, there's another type of fermentation called malolactic fermentation, and that's where we take an acid called malic acid and it gets converted into softer, creamier, butterier lactic acid. And that's how we get the creamy texture of many Chardonnays that are out on the market. You know, those buttery, creamy Chardonnays, that's literally what we're tasting is creamy and buttery, malolactic fermentation. Cool, huh? And of course, most red wines in the world, and I'm saying most, I'm not saying all, most, I'm generalizing, red wines in the world will go through the malolactic fermentation process, especially here in the States, to soften those rougher edges in the wine. If you're into bubbles, if you like your sparkling wine, of course, champagne and sparkling wines go through a secondary fermentation process. You heard me talk about this a few weeks ago on my sparkling wine episode. If you haven't, get back over there and listen to that episode. It's 30 minutes all about sparkling wine. And basically, after the initial fermentation has done and we have a still wine, we are then going to add more sugar and yeast to that bottle or a tank, and we are going to create more bubbles from the CO2. You've heard me mention that a couple times. That CO2, carbon dioxide, is a natural byproduct of the fermentation process, and that's where we get our bubbles in sparkling wine. Awesome, huh? Fun fact, when I was working in winemaking, we did a sparkling wine, and it was one of the most fun. The education was amazing. The process was so much fun, and I had never done anything like that in my life. And just to see the process from vineyard to the first pour of making sparkling wine, it was so much fun. I could go on for hours, but I won't. All right, let's talk about some of the ways that fermentation is used around the world. You know, fermentation, again, is a very global thing. It happens naturally out in the wild every minute of every second of every day of the year. Fermentation is something that happens naturally. We have found a way through all of these different means of capturing that magic and making it into beautiful things like beer. We are going to take malted grains, barley, wheat, whatever we're going to use. We're going to add yeast, and that gives us beer. Lagers, stouts, and everything in between is made using the fermentation process. Cheese. You take milk, you add a little bit of bacteria, and add some thyme in there, and you get all of these beautiful cheeses like camembert, salty feta cheese, and again, a few weeks ago you heard me talk about cheese, and if you haven't, get over there and hear me talk about cheese. That was a fun episode to do. Yogurt, cultured milk. We're going to take the bacteria, we are going to imbue the milk with that bacteria, and it's going to give us a tangy and probiotic rich yogurt. You add some flavor to it or you don't. You mix it into a great stew or whatever. I love putting yogurt into my stews. I'll even put yogurt sometimes into my chilies to make it a little more creamy. Give it a little bite as well. That's a lot of fun. Bread, sourdough. We could not have sourdough, as I mentioned, without fermentation. It adds acidity, it adds chew to the bread. Absolutely stunning. Kombucha. Kombucha is not my thing. I'm not a big fan, but basically you take sweet tea, or as they say in Alabama, where my wife's from, sweet tea, and you add a little bit of yeast to that, and ferment out that sugar, and you get kombucha. Really, really fun. Kimchi and sauerkraut, essentially the same thing. You take cabbage, maybe some carrots. It can be spicy, it can be salty, it's usually crunchy. Vegetables of all kinds, loads of flavor. I've got a brand new jar of kimchi sitting in my fridge. I'm going to make some char siu pork tenderloin tonight, and in honor of this episode, I'm going to pull that jar of kimchi out and have it with my char siu pork tenderloin and fried rice tonight. So that's what I'm going to do. So hopefully that sparks a little something for you. And speaking of Asian food, we could not have miso or soy sauce for that matter without fermented soybeans. Totally wonderful. What all of these share, all of these things share is time, of course, the microbes that are doing the transformation, and the love of the final product. They're all complex and tangy and umami, and I just love every single thing that I just talked about, and my mouth is watering, because of it. Let's not forget about the health benefits of fermented food. Fermented foods can be easier to digest, number one. They, of course, support gut health. They're going to add beneficial bacteria back to your gut and even are going to help you boost your immunity. And, of course, I'm talking about the fermented foods, the kimchi and the kombucha and so on. I'm not necessarily talking about wine or beer. Not so great for your gut health, but we drink it anyway, right? All right, so that brings me to the final segment of the show, pairing wine with fermented food. Yes, please. Here are some of my favorite combos, and we'll run through this list really, really quick because I'm trying to keep this episode under like 25 minutes just to give you a quick and easy one. Sauvignon Blanc and goat cheese. Perfect. I talked about it in the cheese episode a couple shows ago. Sauvignon Blanc, goat cheese, tangy, acid. They're both a perfect match, and you wouldn't have either without fermentation. Riesling and kimchi fried rice. That's exactly what I'm going to be serving with my Asian dinner tonight is a Riesling. I've got a beautiful Riesling sitting in my wine fridge right now, and that's what I'm going to be popping out. A little kimchi fried rice. The sweetness or even the mild sweetness of the wine, in this case Riesling, is going to help with the heat that the kimchi brings to it. Red Burgundy or Pinot Noir. Let's try some miso glazed mushrooms. Oh my God, earthy meets umami. If you've not heard my umami episode yet, probably 10 episodes ago, go listen to the umami episode. It's an awesome one. I'm talking about all of the beautiful things that umami does for flavor and wine pairing. It's really an awesome thing. There's a whole episode about it back there. Go check that out. And of course, sparkling wine. Try pairing that with a little aged Parmesan cheese. Salty and sharp meets crispy and bubbly. What more can I say? Fermented foods have high acidity, often high acidity, and maybe a little funkiness. They could absolutely use and, dare I say, need wines that can match or contrast their qualities in smart ways. And if you need some more help with that, definitely reach out to me. I'm always happy to give free advice on the internet. Just reach out to the wine guy, and I'll be happy to help. And on top of that, if you ever want to throw a themed dinner party, try doing a fermentation night. A little wine, a little cheese, some bread, pickles, kombucha cocktails. It'll be a hit. And if you need help planning that, call the wine guy. I would love to be your wine and fermentation wingman to help plan your next party. So, what did we learn today? Fermentation is the common thread in so many of our favorite things. It's ancient and it's flavorful and it's absolutely worth exploring. The next time you sip some wine or slice into some cheese or crack open a cold beer, I want you to think about the microscopic magic that made it possible. And that is what we're talking about today. Now, here is your mission for this episode. I want you to try one new fermented food. If you've never had kimchi, I need you to go get yourself a jar of kimchi, and I want you to hit me up on social media, take a photo, tag me on Instagram, hit me up on Facebook. Tag me, tell me what you thought. And of course, guys, if you loved this episode, which I certainly hope that you did, please give me a rating, share it with all your foodie friends, and don't forget to follow or subscribe. And as always, everybody, keep wondering, and be awesome. Cheers, everybody. Take care. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Pour and Explore. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, and your questions, so you can drop me a line at cheers@thewineguy.vin. That's cheers@thewineguy.vin. Or let's connect on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. Grab those links on my website at thewineguy.vin. Until next time, let's keep wondering and wandering. Cheers, everyone.